Today I am making one of my favorite styles of beer to drink, a British Best Bitter, and we're going to take a look at how to get a nice, big, vigorous rolling boil, even on 120 power on the Anvil Foundry, and that all starts now. Welcome to Big Monster Brewing, the Anvil Foundry edition. I am Matt, and before we get started, let me ask, if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that bell notification so you don't miss all the cool stuff that I hope will be coming up soon. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Now let's get into the beer. After experimenting with a lager and brewing a beer for competition, it is time for me to just brew a beer for me to drink, and I am going to be doing a British Best Bitter. It's one of my favorite styles to drink. It is a middle of the road beer. I mean, it's got just a little hint of sweet from the malt. Sometimes there's a little bit of a grainy backbone to it from the base malts. There's a bit of bitter from the early additions of the hops, and then a little bit of an earthiness, fruitiness, and floral from the late addition hops and from the yeast, depending on which yeast you use in this strain. I am trying to get a little bit of that fruity profile. Nice, balanced beer. That's a better way to say it than middle of the road. I absolutely love it, and I've brewed have a couple different recipes. I'm going with one that I know I like because I'm going to throw this one into some cans, share it, and keep quite a bit of a stockpile in my fridge to enjoy throughout the rest of the year. For everything in this beer, save the water, we are going completely British-based UK products, and starting off with the grist, which is going to be built on a big base of Maris Otter for the base malts. Then all the specialty malts are UK style as well, starting with the 50-60L British Caramel. We're putting in 5% of that. On top of that, we're going to put in some UK Cariston, and that is another 5% of this grist. And along with that, we're going to use some of the 70-80 crystal mix, and 4% of that's added to this grist. Then to round everything out, UK dextrin malt, or carapils if you will, for the final 3% of this grist. This brew, as all the brews so far in the Anvil Foundry Brewing Series, I am using the 6.5 gallon Anvil Foundry. I am starting with reverse osmosis distilled water so that I can add my own minerals to get closer to a UK profile to make this beer as authentic as I possibly can, not being anywhere near the United Kingdom. And I get all of that water recirculating and ramp up to a mash temperature of 151 degrees Fahrenheit. With this being a British-based beer, I probably should have put all of my notations in for temperature in Celsius and all the weights in metric, but I literally did not think of that until just this moment. So, oops. Once that strike water gets up to temperature, it's time to mash in, and then we're going to keep the recirculation going and get this rest and recirc going for a full 60 minutes. While the conversion is going in the mash, it's time to get the boil additions ready, and the biggest addition to this is the hops, and it is the quintessential UK hop. This beer is going to feature one hop from beginning to end, and that is East Kent Golding, or for some reason that I've still haven't figured out, Kent Goldings, as Artisan Hops calls it. I've had many a heated conversation with the few British brewing friends I have, but it's not my fault. I didn't print that label. I just bought the hops. To start off, we're going to add 26 IBUs worth of hops to the beginning of the boil at 60 minutes. Then the first flavor and aroma addition of 8 IBUs worth of hops at 15 minutes. And the final aroma blast at the very end at flame out. There's no real IBU calculation for this, so it's 0.75 ounce or approximately 20 grams right at flame out, or in this case, at power off for the kettle. And of course, there's my additional usual boil additions, and that is yeast nutrients at 10 minutes, and then just a little bit of a Warflock tablet at 2 minutes. the 60-minute mash complete, it's time to lift the basket and let it drain while I sparge it with a gallon of 168-degree water that I had ready and heated. And while I'm doing that, I also ramp up the temperature and put the foundry into the boil mode to get a little bit ahead of the game on heating up that sweet wort. One practice I have been doing while working with the foundry is once the sparge is done and once the grains are well drained, I do take a pre-boil gravity and compare it to what Beersmith says I should have. My target pre-boil gravity, according to Beersmith, is 1.044, but I have 1.040. Now, knowing that I get roughly 5 points for every 30 minutes of boiling I do at 120 volts on the Anvil Foundry, I am on the fly on brew day going to extend the boil time from the planned 60 minutes to 90 minutes to try to make up for those lost points in the pre-boil gravity. So just a little bit off subject here because it's part of the brew day. You'll notice I'm brewing outside again, and that was because I did check the forecast that morning. It was supposed to be beautiful from sun up to sundown, and even a little bit hot. So I was ready for just a nice calm day outside. And if I'm bringing this up, you know there's a reason why. Luckily, none of that rain was blowing in the direction that could get through the screens of where I was brewing and into the boil kettle, which was actually a good bit of unplanned research because I never went out there during any kind of rain to see which is the best spot on that patio to actually brew if it does rain like that. Turns out I was already set up in that what would be the best spot, the driest spot, in fact, completely dry spot. So that's good to know for the future, although I wish the weather reports were a little more accurate, but it's Central Florida. That is never going to happen. So now we're getting up to a boil, and like I said, I was adding another 30 minutes to it. And as you can see in the video, there is just that slight ripple on top of the liquid, and that's about what you get when you use 120 watts on this system. Sometimes I do want a more aggressive, more vigorous boil, especially in situations where I'm trying to hit a specific number before I really start brewing, as I am here. And I'm stuck with 120 volts right now in these areas I like to brew in the house. I'm either going to brew on the back patio, which is as far away from my electric panel as you can get. I can't even imagine what running a 240 line would be cost out there. Or in my kitchen, which all the wall outlets are 120 volt as well. So I did have to do some reading, some studying, and some experimenting on my own to figure out how to possibly get a bit of an aggressive boil going in situations like I'm in this brew. So what I've seen is that kind of leaving the lid mostly on top of the unit does help create a vigorous boil. I wanted to see if I could do the same concept but leave more of an open space for more of the steam to come out, and I did come up with one. And it all starts with a little trinket that every beer enthusiast that has ever gone to a beer festival certainly has on hand. And that is one of these keychain bottle openers that looks just like this. So I use it to prop up one end of the lid, and you can see that only about roughly 10 to 15% of the lid is actually still making contact with the rest of the foundry, which means they have all that open space for the steam to get out, which is a concern for a lot of brewers, that you don't have your boil off dripping back in, especially with Pilsner malts in some cases. And doing this, it only takes a few minutes to get up to what I would consider a vigorous boil. Now, there are a couple drawbacks to this. As you probably saw as I was removing that bottle opener from the setup, I did use a paper towel. It's because those metal keychains get very hot very quick. You also notice it's kind of precariously just sitting there, and just, I guess, gravity from the lid is holding it in. I will say in the early days when I experimented on this, it did fall forward into that. And when I really need to use this during the entire brew day, I do tie a string to the end of the little loop that's in the keychain and onto the handle of the anvil in case it does fall the wrong direction. The other concern that I don't know what side of the argument I fall on, if this is an urban or a old brewer's legend or fact. I wouldn't do this for a Pilsner heavy base malt because of the whole DMS precursor possibility. I listen to Brewlosophy, I read books and articles and posts, and I know it's been tested and proven not necessarily if completely a fallacy that happens, but there is just that concern that it was even talked about at one point that kind of just bothers me. So I probably would never do this with a Pilsner heavy base malt beer. But other than that, it has worked great to kind of fast forward some of my boils and get that really vigorous, aggressive boil that I want sometimes with my beers. With this awful weather outside, I decided to make my cooling point 100 degrees rather than my usual below 90 degrees. Transfer the wort into a carboy, seal it up, and put it into the fridge to cool. Once the wort hits 65 degrees, I take it back out. I add some direct oxygen to it, pitch the yeast, which is Y yeast 1968 London ESB ale yeast, put it into the fridge for 10 days, and then start checking the finishing gravity to see where it is at. At 10 days, it's at the gravity I want, so I increase the temperature to 70 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 days for a diacetyl rest. Then I cold crash it for 4 days, keg it, carbonate it, and in this case, I put it into cans for tasting. It is tasting time, and I just finished filling the glass, and as you can see, we got that nice, rich, dark copper, I guess you'd say. Not quite amber, but not quite the light copper color. And the carbonation level, as you see, very low. I did carbonate it very low. I carbonated it with the Blickman Quick Carb, just under 2 volumes of CO2 for the entire beer. I based that on the traditional serving volumes at about 1.3 to just under 2. Now, granted, I think that's basically comes from it being served out of a cask, but I still wanted to try to hit the style best I could. I'd still give it a little bit of a, what do you call it, a body through the carbonation on it. So aroma is, I could smell it right away. First thing you're hit with is that caramel sweetness that is from that big base malt, the Maris Otter, the different crystals, the 50-60 and the 70-80. It's a touch of sweet. It's not overwhelmingly sweet, but you smell that before you smell anything else. If you really dig into it, you get a little bit of biscuity, a little bit of grainy, but definitely the sweet malt, not sugary sweet, but that sweet malt profile is the first thing that hits. I cannot stand it anymore. I am going to taste it. The style of beer is just so good. And this is right about where I want it. The first thing you get is that malty sweet. Again, not cloyingly sweet, not sugary sweet, but the malt sweet right over your tongue. First thing you taste. On the back end is a distinct bitterness without being astringent or too much. It's that East Kent Golding hop that just gives a right amount of earthiness to it. A touch of floral, but the bitter is what really comes through. I do have another version of this that I make pretty much the same grist and Godiva hops in the end for a little bit more of a hoppiness, but not quite hitting the English IPA. But when I make this and have made it in the past just a few times, it's the East Kent Golding that just is like, it's just a wonderfully balanced style. I'm just going to make sure that's right. It is I'm gonna say I'm extremely lucky. I got this batch to come out the way I want. I am complimenting the style when I just kind of go overboard on this description. It is a style that I love. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy I was able to dial it in, but a lot of things can go wrong in a home brewing situation or any brewing situation, I guess. I mean, pros can have their problems as well, but I was lucky. Everything came out as planned. Doesn't always happen. And because of the style just existing, that's what I'm happy about. I'm happy to be drinking the style of beer. So great outcome, great brew day, great tasting session. I am going to really enjoy this beer, and I had a really fun time canning. Canning is way more fun than it has any right to be, and I'll probably talk more about that in the show. And as you can see, I did put a label. You probably already saw it. I shot some footage of the label itself. These are supposed to be, well, they are water-resistant labels from Online Labels, and they do a pretty good job. I have noticed the more, I have some labels that are really, really black. The thicker the black ink is, the less resistant to water that has been. So I've had to make sure I pick the can up kind of away from the black, or else I look like I just got pulled out of a jail cell, like I just got fingerprinted. But other than that, I really enjoy the labels. I'm obviously not going to label every can of beer I make, but I'm going to label 3 or 4, especially if I'm going to give them away and if I'm going to show them on camera. Plus, designing the labels is fun, but it's not necessary because when I crack the can open and pour the beer, I really don't care about the can anymore. So one more sip to wrap up because I'm just really enjoying this beer. It's a wonderful style. Absolutely wonderful style. One technical note I did want to mention about this is that its final gravity did come in at 1.75%, which technically makes it a strong bitter in the BJCP category 11. That would put it in the subcategory 11C. I think the range is 4.6 to 5. 4.6, I think, is the low point, which is the point of this. But I've had strong bitters before. I've had commercial strong bitters from the UK and some US takes on them. And this doesn't quite taste as strong as it. Doesn't quite taste as full-bodied. So I'm comfortable serving this as a best bitter. And in fact, I entered it as a best bitter in the same competition I talked about when I brewed the alt beer. So we'll see if the judges agree or if they think it is too strong. If a very experienced palate knows their bitters, I might have pushed it a little too far. But for me, it's the balance of that sweet start and that bitter finish, and then just everything in between. It's just such a great style. I'm happy with it. I'll call it a best bitter. And if no one wants it because I misnamed it, fine. It's more for me. So I already said I was going to do. I did my one more, so I'll save that. I will say thank you for watching. Got another Anvil Foundry brew video coming up behind this next week. So if you haven't already, please subscribe. If you have any questions or comments or have anything to say what you like about this particular style, the best bitter, any British bitter styles, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear what other people think about this. And that is it. I will see you in that next episode.